If one of your vendors brings you a segmentation with like 9 or 10 segments, you need to tell them to go back to the drawing board.
What was the biggest surprise you found using consumer data?
We had great ideas in terms of creative execution, and consumers and shoppers felt very differently. That being said, sometimes you can deliver an idea to the market that just the market's not ready for it yet.
Daniel Stradtman has led marketing, insights, and analytics at some of the biggest names out there. We're talking Walmart, Amazon, GE, even Berkshire Hathaway. He's now the CMO at Bloomfire, where he's using AI to change the way companies manage and use knowledge.
Was there any specific case where you came back, like it was a surprise to you, like what your thinking was versus what the outcome became?
As millennials kind of got older, they stopped caring about sustainability and they started caring about, well, does this actually work?
I want to understand, like, how does your company now help bigger enterprises to analyze their data? Do you have your own AI?
We don't want rotten data in our AI. So the quality of the foundation you build is going to be a huge determiner of the quality of the output that comes from whatever AI, right? So if I have bad data in, I have bad data out.
Do you use any personality testing in combination with consumer data to execute your marketing campaigns, and how do you do it?
The short answer is yes.
E-coffee with experts. How are you?
Very well. How are you, honey?
I'm great, and I'm super happy to talk to CMOs all the time as an aspiring CMO myself. And today we're going to talk about your expertise in data, consumer insights, and a little bit of psychology, because why not? It's fun. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell the world why you're awesome?
Well, as a member of Generation X, it's very hard for me to tell stories about why I'm awesome, but I will give it a chance. Yeah, my name's Dan Stradtman. I've had a 25-year career across different strategic marketing, insights, analytics roles at probably companies you've heard of, including Walmart, Amazon, General Electric, Berkshire Hathaway. I now lead marketing at Bloomfire, which is a AI-focused knowledge management company. We are in the process of redefining what that means into how do you bring greater intelligence to the enterprise. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. But it's my pleasure to be here with you, Annie, and spend some time talking.
Amazing, Dan. One of my question that I always ask with marketers, especially when you're not doing something obvious like social media or paid ads, like how would you explain AI-powered knowledge management to a 6-year-old?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love the analogy to a 6-year-old because, you think about it, it's a nervous system in many ways, right? Like the fact is, like, you're thirsty, you take a drink, you're hungry, you eat something, you stub your toe, you yell out in pain. Ideally, that's what it should be. It should be the ability of an organization to feel that nervous system and to be able to say, if I have a need for this information, it's instantly transferred, being able to deliver that at the point of inflection, to be able to impact people's decision making and allow them to make better and faster decisions. Ultimately, AI-powered knowledge management is that. In practice, what we find, though, a lot of times is it's not that. It's you stub your toe and you don't feel the pain, or you don't realize something's hot, because organizations tend to keep knowledge in silos. They tend to be somewhat territorial on information. There's long-standing proprietary knowledge that gets lost over the years with attrition and role changes. And so part of our job at Bloomfire is to help put in systems and processes that will make sure that you can get the most out of your data, the most out of your insights, the most out of your knowledge, and ultimately drive better outcomes as a company.
I think that's a very great way to summarize it. And I'm excited to learn more, because a lot of the times that, the startups, they start gathering data, but then they are really caught up with the action. They don't sit down and analyze, or they even don't have the resources to do so yet. One of my next questions actually is like, over your career, what was the biggest surprise you found using consumer data? Maybe you had a hypothesis like, what, I think most of these target audience wants this, but then using your data, you found out something else. Or I bet there are like a million ways to interpret this, but like, yeah, share with us one of your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain, immutable forces when it comes to kind of how humans buy and what they do, right? Like kind of, the way, it's amazing how the way you're brought up or the way the experiences you have when you're young influence many things later in life. But In terms of surprises, there have been cases where, especially in creative advertising and that, it's very easy to get emotional about something, right? It's
Oh
very
yeah.
easy to say, oh, I love this concept, I love this idea, and then you test it with a consumer and it kind of bombs, or you test it with an audience and it kind of bombs. Certainly have had those situations both at Walmart and GE where we felt like we had great ideas in terms of creative execution, and consumers and shoppers felt very differently. That being said, sometimes you can deliver an idea to the market that just the market's not ready for it yet. And
Hmm.
so, the question is how do you discern between those ideas that, if given the time to germinate, if given the time to grow and evolve, will turn into something that consumers accept versus, look, this is just a bad idea. From a data standpoint, it really is a matter of art and science, right? Like, you can go to every bit of data, you can check everything twice, but you do have to have that kind of understanding of your market, understanding of your consumer, your customer, because there are going to be cases where the data doesn't tell the whole story, and you need to weave that element of humanism, if you would, into what your decision making is. So yeah, I mean, it's, if we at Bloomfire, we are very data driven. We make decisions, in terms of what we invest in based off of a kind of a very clean set of investment criteria. But there's also cases where we say, you know what, I think this is going to work. We need to try it. Let's give it a shot, even though the math doesn't make sense.
I see. Was there any specific case where you came back, like it was a surprise to you, like what your thinking was versus what the outcome became?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was trying to think of a good consumer example from, my earlier days. I think here's one that's interesting. So when I was working for a specialty chemical company, we played in the healthcare space a bit, right? So we weren't making the brand, but we were making the products that the brands would sell. And so one of the things we were looking at was sustainability. So chemical company obviously cares about sustainability. How does that impact what they do? And so we went in with this hypothesis that, the millennial generation was going to be very focused on sustainability and using sustainable products. And for the most part, that bear it out. But here was the nuance. As millennials kind of got older, right? So you think about the millennial generation between, at the time, it was probably 25 to 40.
Okay.
As they
Yeah.
were kind of getting into that upper 30s age, they stopped caring about sustainability and they started caring about, well, does this actually work? Does this decrease the lines on my face? Does this make my skin glow like it used to? And where they transferred that focus on sustainability was to their children. So, they had for years been very focused on, hey, everything I put in my body, everything I put on my face has to be naturally derived or has to be sustainable. As they got a little bit older and recognized, like, hey, I might need something a little bit stronger, they kind of ceased to care as much about that for themselves, but they carried through that same mentality when it came to now their children. So a little bit of a surprise as you start to see the differences in generational trends and those types of things, because those millennials actually started looking more like Gen X and boomers as they aged, which again, probably shouldn't be surprising, but the initial data might have suggested otherwise.
That's amazing finding actually. Like it kind of shows how our brain initially works when we are younger. Like we always kind of want to say the things that should be said, but deep inside what we actually want. Like in this case, like they want to look younger. People want to look younger, and the bottom line, I don't care what is it made of as long as I look
Yep.
25 forever. And that's kind of like a dark truth to our human nature as consumers and for advertisers at the end of the day. This message hasn't changed. Like I don't think this message has changed since, boomers age until even Gen what
Right.
are we now? Gen
I think we're
Z. Yeah.
Z, are we? Are we on Z or Alpha,
We are,
maybe?
yeah. So Gen Z is now entering workforce.
Right.
They must be chanting sustainability. I think instead of sustainability, I see LGBT and like social equality more as a trend. But who knows what we're gonna say in 10 years? Maybe it's gonna be something more raw, more controversial. Who knows? Who knows?
Maybe.
So yeah, thank you for sharing this case study. I think it's a great finding
Oh,
for us. Yeah. So one juicy thing. You work with Amazon and Walmart and GE, which are like giant companies.
big
No matter
company.
what generation you're in, we know. Any psychological techniques as a marketer you picked up on, where you see that big brands were able to keep their customers or attract new ones?
I actually have a really great example for this. So obviously there's plenty of techniques in terms of surveying customers and choice exercise data, things like discrete choice and those types of things you can use to kind of isolate people's decision making. One of my favorites though was at Walmart, and I was there from 2008 to 2011, so about 3.5 years, which was right in the middle of a fairly large US recession, right? So you had a consumer that was very constrained in terms of spending. So Walmart, you would think, perfect company to be set up for success. They obviously cater to folks who are looking to save money. But what was happening was is the competition ramped up, right? And so you were not only competing against historically Target and those types of things, but you were competing against dollar stores and you were competing against grocers who were focused on price cutting. So what we wanted to be able to do was to really understand what is the essence and what is that loyalty hook for a consumer who says, I choose Walmart over everything else. And so we used a technique of progressive relaxation interviewing. I'll describe it for you. So there was a firm here in the US that championed it. And the idea was to bring people in for individual interviews. So we recruited people who were very loyal to Walmart. And we had them kind of, instead of doing an interview like you or I might be doing right now, they would be in a comfortable room. There'd be comfortable chairs. The lights would be a little bit low. And the moderator would take them through a progressive relaxation exercise where it would kind of allow them to relax, allow them to, you do some deep breathing, you do some visualization. And then you start to ask them these very deep questions around, do you remember the first time you ever went shopping? Do you remember the first time you ever shopped at Walmart? What was your
What?
last time shopping? Yeah, exactly. And so what that did was it kind of turns on a part of your brain that's normally not on when you answer these types of questions, right? And you got these really deep kind of insights about why someone might choose to shop at Walmart and choose to be loyal. And essentially what it boiled, so we did a bunch of those interviews. I think it was 27, if I'm not mistaken, across, these loyalist Walmart people. But the big insight, the big reason we found was that this really felt like, if you think about the loyal Walmart shopper, it's this rural suburban mom who has a family, right? Who's doing the best she can to kind of manage the family's finances and be able to put food on the table, clothes on their back. And it almost takes you back to this kind of hunter-gatherer type of mentality, right? When you're thinking about it. And what Walmart represented was their happy hunting ground. That was where she knew that she was going to have the greatest success. She knew that she wasn't going to get taken advantage of. And she knew in those situations that she could go there and get what she needed to take care of her family at a cost that was something she could do. So we did kind of use that to then inform strategy around, well, if that's the case, then we need to make sure that we're really focused our messaging on that customer. We need to really make sure we have our pricing in line to serve that customer on the things that she needs for her family. And we need to reassure her we're there for her, right? And a lot of the marketing that started to come through in 2010, 2011, 2012 was focused on that core customer, in part because of research like.
That's fantastic. So I just want to highlight like the quality of the interview was way, way different than some of these random interviews people do if they ever do qualitative data gathering. I find it super amusing. Why? Because it took another layer of, like, as you said, meditation, putting the person into a vulnerable position to open up what he or she wants to say or had experience with. So that's a pretty incredible data study. And after that, so it was during the recession 2008. How fast was it for your team to execute these changes based on the data?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ani. Having worked at these big monolithic companies, right? Like sometimes change comes hard. Like change
Oh,
management is probably the hardest thing to do. The thing about retail and the thing about a company like Walmart, though, is like you can do things very fast, right? The speed of retail is very different than the speed of consumer goods or manufacturing. Once you actually could get some buy-in from the leadership and from the company to do it, it can happen fairly rapidly. I would say that over the course of 3 to 6 months, the messaging changes can come fairly rapidly, right? Because you can start to iterate on these ideas, you can start to put them into storyboards, you can do some testing, and then you can get them into advertising, which happened. Bigger changes, how do you structure things like pricing or assortment, or like those take longer, right? Because those are operational type of things. So what was funny was when I left Walmart in 2011 and then went to General Electric, I was actually now selling into Walmart, right? I was in the consumer business in GE. We were selling light bulbs and lighting products. And so now Walmart became a customer. And so we had done all this work on the core customer at Walmart to talk about like having the low price, having the assortment. Now, as somebody selling into Walmart, it was tough because it was like, well, you need to get to a lower price because we have this core customer that we have to serve, right? So I kind of got caught up in my own research after the fact
Wow.
because now I was trying to sell in our lighting products to them and they were saying, well, no, it has to be this product for this core customer. And so call it a little bit of reaction or karma, if you will. But I
Yes,
certainly,
karma.
yeah, I saw the effects of it as a vendor now to Walmart being able to say, hey, look, the assortment has changed and the pricing needs to change because we have this Walmart mom who's really focused in on making sure she can do what she needs for her family.
Wow. So I wonder, like, did you actually then, and the vendor then go into the manufacturer and then restated the same problem? I don't know. That would be
Well,
like
we
a
were the manufacturer too in that case. To your point, we did have to think about, well, how do we serve this a little bit differently? How do we partner differently, right? We ended up losing a bunch of shelf space at Walmart in part because they took that and ran with it and said, well, we're going to move to more private label goods, right? As opposed to branded goods because private label goods tend to be cheaper, right?
sure.
Like store brand type of thing. So, for us, that it certainly was a negative for me at GE because the assortment changed away from here's this branded shelf to here's this private label shelf. But we found other ways and other retailers where we could kind of fill that in and come up with different ways to bring ideas to market. So it all ends up working through and working out. But certainly that was a Walmart's proposition of save money, live better was powerful, and it definitely carried through the way that they approach their assortment and their pricing.
I'm very happy that you have shared all these details because a lot of the time people don't see the full picture. And one more comment on this one too. Like I know the feeling of going from working to a vendor. Like I used to work in another company who was partnering with my current company, which was great now for me as a marketer though, because now I understand the target market of the company. So in that case, like you understand Walmart really, really well. So selling to them or other competitors like Walmart is a lot easier. So
Yeah, I mean, it carries through to what I'm doing now, right? Because I CMO of Bloomfire, I was a customer before, and so I
oh
understand.
yes, you mentioned.
When we talk about implementing this knowledge management platform into big companies, like I've done it, and so I get the challenges, I get the opportunities, and my goal, my title is CMO, and that's all fine and good, but a lot of what I do is working with our big customers to be able to say, how do you get the most out of the partnership we have and how do you overcome change management issues at your company to get knowledge to be used more effectively and efficiently.
I see, I see. And now moving to like Bloomfire, I want to understand like how does your company now help bigger enterprises to analyze their data? Do you have your own AI or is it through GPT or API? I don't know.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that
it's a great question. So think about all the data and the knowledge in a company. I mean, that's the foundation, right? And so the quality of the foundation you build is going to be a huge determiner of the quality of the output that comes from whatever AI you're using, right? So if I have bad data in, I have bad data out. That's, garbage in, garbage out is as true as it's ever been, and it's very true in generative AI. And so ultimately, as a knowledge layer, our goal is to be a single source of truth for the organization, right? The ability to use Bloomfire to be that place where you put your single source of truth documents, but also have those tentacles into these other platforms, SharePoint, Salesforce, Box, whatever the case may be, your customer support, knowledge base, and basically be able to evaluate the quality of that data in there so that when someone serves a question up, that question is using the right data to answer it in AI. Because if I'm taking the wrong data, if I'm taking data that's redundant or outdated or trivial, we call that rot. We don't want rotten data in our AI. And so, that's ultimately what we're trying to solve for is how do you create the best sources of knowledge for your organization? Bloomfire is going to help you determine that and then serve into either one of our kind of platform-based AI tools, right? So we have an AI tool. You ask kind of how that works. We're serving that up currently using OpenAI's LLM right now. Over time, my belief is LLMs are going to become a bit of a commodity, right? And I think what we'll see happen is like we'll have smaller open source LLMs based on industry and so you could say, well, this is a finance company, so we're going to use an LLM that has a finance bend to it, right? And so being able to put that LLM on top of your platform, on top of your knowledge is going to be more effective than, using kind of an out of the box LLM. So I think that's where it's headed today. We have AI tools that help to, get questions answered, to help synthesize information and bring back those responses, to be able to be that essentially the brain of that nervous system, that I described earlier in our discussion.
I see. I see. If somebody was to get started with data analysis but using AI, say GPT or Gemini or Claude, how would you advise them to get started? Let's say I have a spreadsheet full of leads. What do I do then?
As somebody who used to be very, 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 very good in Excel and who's gotten worse over the years as my titles have increased, I think one of the things that we're seeing AI use for is we haven't done it in that particular case. There's lots of folks out there who are kind of coming to me saying, oh, I can solve this problem, solve that problem with AI. If I'm using it from GPT, right, like I think part of it is do that initial analysis to understand either what types of companies are they coming from? What roles do they have at these companies? So use it as a summarization tool first to
Summarization,
get a
yeah.
sense of who your ICP is. Because if you can kind of do that and say, all right, look, I've got this list of leads. I recognize like 20% of them are from the finance industry and 25% are from the manufacturing industry. Okay, help me, next prompt would be something around, give me some distribution around like what's an average title or what's, an average kind of role in the company. You can start to then say, all right, let me research this a little bit. Like, what are the problems that this type of lead is trying to solve? Now, that's going to be your critical differentiator. One of the things we do for every customer that comes through the door, customer prospect, is we attempt to build out a business case with them to find that, like, hey, look, you're coming to us because you're trying to solve a problem. It's our job to understand what your problem is, like
Yeah.
in a very proprietary, a very specific way. And so by kind of co-authoring a business case, we can then match up and go, hey, look, here's your business case. Here's how we would solve it. And then most importantly, here's the value you will get from this. And I don't mean just esoteric value. I mean dollar value, right? Because if you're going to spend X number of dollars on our software, we want you to know that there's a real ROI there. We have the data to support that. In fact, we have a piece coming out in Harvard Business Review in a few weeks. We have the data to support that, and that's going to allow us to have a better partnership going forward. So to answer your question maybe a bit more directly, if you've got a list full of leads, my first thing would be to use it to help you summarize and get a sense of who your ICP is based on those leads, and then go use it for research to understand the problems they're trying to solve.
Yeah. That's pretty straightforward and very, very practical and actionable for myself, but also, the listeners as well. I'm really a big fan of personality tests. I don't know about you, but I'm really into MBTI and the DISC personality.
Yep.
I think the MBTI is kind of I don't know, it's kind of like a fantasy book. So it's fun to talk about it, but I don't believe it. But the DISC framework has been really helpful. I don't know. Isn't it made of like the founders were bored and they've created 16 different personality types and like a Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter for me sometimes.
I don't know if I've ever heard that, but that's pretty great. I like that. It's a fun thing. I've certainly, being in the field in psychology like I was, kind kind of going through school and getting a master's in clinical psych, I certainly have taken my fair share. And, my experience with them, if, is like the DISC is a great example. Like you tend to answer those questions in the frame of mind you're in that day, right?
Yes,
And so,
exactly.
for something like that, I've seen as my career, I went from being a fairly even distribution, maybe early in my career when I was an individual contributor, to very much a high D now. I've certainly experienced those.
I found that disc was easy enough because it's just 4 letters and it helps me to even pick up on somebody's body language and tone of voice and say, okay, you're primarily DI or SC. That had helped me. Anyway, so my question about personality test though is, do you use any personality test in combination with consumer data to execute your marketing campaigns, and how do you do it?
I mean, the short answer is no, from a sense of like pure personality test, right? So on the clinical side, like there's plenty of personality tests out there that are designed for clinical settings. Those would not be appropriate in any case because the reality is they're used to find, disorders and diseases, right? On things like the DISC, on things like the Myers-Briggs, those historically, I haven't used them to necessarily create campaigns. Certainly use them within my teams to better understand motivations or understand how to communicate better, right? The thing about the DISC, whether you believe it or not, is like, I don't really care what I am, but I actually care what the people who work for me are because I want to make sure I can communicate in a style that they are able to receive it in, right? So as a leader, it's my job to change to help them get better, right? It's not like me standing up here with an iron fist. That said, from a marketing standpoint, when you start to get into things like survey work where you're talking about conjoint, where you're talking about discrete choice, tournament analysis is something I used when I was early in my career to understand preferences for different flavors or foods and stuff. Those are all kind of, forced choice exercises that are not personality based, but kind of push people into a category or a bucket, right? The ugly
Yeah.
here's the immutable truth about consumer segmentation on it. Doesn't matter what technique you use, where you do it, you will always end up, when you do a consumer segmentation, between 5 to 8 segments. You will
Okay.
always end up. It's because it's always it's always 5 or more because that, all of segmentation is trying to find the points of differentiation between people, right? Like, and that can be behavioral, it can be attitudinal, it can be demographic. And so you need 5 because 5 at least is going to allow you to do different things. And once you get above 8, it's too hard to implement. So you never go above 8. So it's always going to be 5 to 7, and you're always going to, end up in that place because that's the pragmatic thing to do. It's not always a statistical thing to do, but the stats will end up supporting your pragmatism. So
I see.
personality tests, haven't really used those, but used plenty of statistical techniques over the years to figure out how to market to people and how to be able to meet their needs.
I think that's a very practical way to look at it because a lot of times when, let's say I have the data now, but then how many groups do I create? A lot of people can go overboard, like they micro niche it and they cannot execute it, as you said, or they don't bring enough variety. So the messaging can be off as well. I definitely gonna take this 5 to 8 rule in my head as well, so I can execute it better. Execute my marketing
Yeah,
campaign better.
when you're a CMO, if one of your vendors brings you a segmentation with like 9 or 10 segments, you need to tell them to go back to the drawing board.
Yes, yes, correct. I see that artificial intelligence and tech and just the internet, like it really makes things go fast, trends to go up and down. Like there's always a TikTok trend, there's always some sort of social media trend. They move really fast. But I feel like us humans, we fundamentally don't change that much. We don't change that fast. And as an advertiser and marketer myself, I want to learn from your expertise. Like, what are some of the key qualities that no matter what age we are, no matter how fast AI can, I don't know, create images and like replicate us as a cartoon and anything, what are those 5 things that will never change? Because I feel like those are the things that us advertisers and marketers should be focused on, bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, It's a really great question, and I think it's been hard for me to watch some of that. I mean, I have a son who's in his early 20s now, finishing up college, right? Like, and so I think about the world he's entering versus the world I entered, 25 plus years ago, right? And so ultimately, as marketers, we have to understand like there's physical limitations, there's socioeconomic limitations, right? There's cultural limitations, like those are going to be the biggest defining forces. And so if you can really understand those elements of a person and understand and say, hey, look, what makes this immutable about a person in terms of how they were brought up or the culture they were brought up in, or the geographic location they were brought up in, right? Like understanding that, I think at a one-on-one level is always really important. In a mass level, what you find is that people deviate to the norm, right? One of the insights we had at Walmart, and again, this was a while ago, was Walmart serves a vast majority of the U.S. population, right? Does color, creed, location, whatever the case may be, like a lot of Walmart customers. We would do a lot of research on demographic groups, Hispanic customers, African American customers, and that. And what we saw was this was an insight from Hispanic customers is as they kind of became more like as generationally they became more acculturated into the country, right? So it's like first generation versus third generation Hispanics would tend to buy things more like they're people of the same socioeconomic standpoint of standing as opposed to their cultural standing, right? So if I'm earlier generation Hispanic, I'm buying maybe based on Hispanic trends. If I'm third generation, I'm buying more based on what my neighbors are buying or what my socioeconomic standing is. And so it's not to say it's lost, it just changes over time, right? I think the technology is moving so fast that the hardest thing right now is to determine what's real and what's not. You
Yeah.
mentioned the TikTok trends and stuff, and it's like whether it's TikTok or Twitter or X, I guess, or Instagram, right? Like the amount of products that can get served up to you and marketing can do to kind of create excitement, to create, some manner of momentum behind those. That one-to-one marketing just didn't exist before. Like that's what's different. Like it's like this is your feed or your set of your algorithm, right? And so being able to do that at that individual level, I don't think that's to me the thing that's the biggest change maybe since I was doing more consumer marketing. It's just you now have a mechanism to get one to folks. And so I do think that is changing how people buy. I think, there's a great, posting or something that shows like who the top retailer was decade by decade. And what you realize, like every 20 years, it's a different company. It was Kmart in the 70s. It was, Sears. It was Walmart. It was Amazon, right? There's going to be something post Amazon. And so what that is, whether it's Temu or whether it's Alibaba, whether it's yeah, I mean, like, there's something else coming because the way that you reach these consumers is just changing rapidly. So I don't know. I mean, I still kind of come back to you are who you are as a person, but in the same vein, like the technology is moving so fast, the landscape around you as a consumer is what's rapidly changing. So yeah, I'm probably not the best answer in the world, but it's just a perspective from, a Gen X guy who has seen a lot in the last 20 years.
One thing I picked up on throughout this podcast is we often talk about age and generations. And I wonder if that's part of your thinking as well when you create or look at any marketing campaigns. Like more of like looking at the demographic of our audience. So say my ICP are CMOs, but then also look at what generation of CMOs so that I can tailor my messages that well. Is that true? I don't know. It's just
I
something I
mean,
picked.
I think you have to, right? I mean, some of the nomenclature is different. Some of the words that different generations are using for different things. I mean, I'm sure there are words and phrases that, Gen Z or Gen Alpha is using that I'm probably not as tuned into, right? So having a diverse team around you, which is something I strive to do, like diversity of thought, diversity of generation, diversity of backgrounds, right? Like that's why that's most important is like you need to be able to take in those perspectives and you need to be able to account for those in your outbound marketing. You need somebody to go like, hey, old guy, that's a dumb idea, right? Like, and my team does that to me every once in a while too. Like we joke about movies that I remember seeing and they don't know the funny quotes, and I think I'm hilarious, but they sometimes are like, I don't even
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. But I do think, like, just generally, we talked about the example earlier with the millennials. Like, what ends up happening is people in generations age, like, the needs become similar because that is the thing that binds us as humans is we will continue to kind of age and get more knowledge, get more understanding. And so the needs that were part of Gen X a decade ago are now the needs that elder millennial has.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great way to summarize. Also, just a mindset of how to look at the consumer data. I mean, most of these answers and talks, today's podcast was more of the mindset and how to approach. And I'm sure that if people want to actually get real consumer data and information inside, they can go to Bloomfire, which is why if people would like to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, so just reach out to me there. I try to post fairly regularly with my random thoughts and stuff. Ultimately, I think you said it, Annie, that the technology is moving very rapidly across both consumer businesses, B2B type of organizations, and the CMO you talk about as you build your career to become a CMO, which I have no doubt will happen. The folks who are going to be successful in that are going to, be folks who are pragmatic, who get stuff done, who understand how to use the technology to their advantage, right? And understand the ways to help it be more efficient. But ultimately, they're going to be smart, nice people who figure stuff out and are able to connect with, their consumers and connect with the leadership at the companies they work for. I wish you a lot of success as you build towards that over the next few years in your career.
Thank you so much, Dan. It means a lot to me. And thank you so much for joining the
Yeah,
eCoffee for
my pleasure.
Experts. Yeah, I will link all your contacts in the description. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Okay.
Thank you all.